Welcome to Day 2 on the Trail. We're glad you're here. We have 3 readings for today, from Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 25, from Genesis 1:1 through chapter 2 and the first part of verse 4, and the wisdom of Ben Sirach, chapter 1, verses 1 through 30. In the Gospel of Luke, we are looking at the Annunciation of the birth of John the Baptist, which precedes the Annunciation of the birth of Jesus. When we read the stories of these 2 Annunciations, one today and one on day 3, pay attention to the question that Zechariah asks Gabriel in verse 18, and then how that question compares to what Mary asks Gabriel in verse 34, which we'll read on day 3. Also notice how Gabriel speaks to Zechariah and Mary differently. Why is Gabriel's response so different? How are their questions different? And is Luke trying to tell us something in these parallel accounts? More to come on day 3. In the first chapter of Genesis, we have one of the most beautiful passages in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, it's one of the most beautiful passages of Hebrew literature ever written. It's concise, and it's very powerful. Now, in many cases, modern readers of the creation narrative in Genesis assume that the author intended to provide a detailed account of the order and duration of God's creative activity. However, if the means of creation is all that is gleaned from Genesis 1, far more is lost than gained. The repetitive literary structure of the narrative seems to highlight the kind of work God performs, rather than provide a distant reflection on one creative event. That is, perhaps the ancients were not as interested in the how of creation as learning more about who. What kind of God creates like this? What kind of God works like this? After all, someday, the how of this creation will be gone, but the who will not. When considering the Genesis 1 narrative, the 6 days of creation are often assumed to be arranged chronologically. After all, each is a day. However, as many have noted, there are inconsistencies in this approach. For example, how did light exist before the luminaries? Or how was a day marked before the instruments which marked time were created on the 4th day? For example, we see that the first 3 days have a common theme. On the first day, light and darkness are given boundaries. When light is created, darkness is not eliminated, but delimited. On the second day, an expanse was created to separate the waters which was below the expanse from the waters which was above the expanse. God once again demonstrates his sovereignty by bringing boundaries and order. Now, with the waters properly bounded, God sets further limits on the seas so that the land may appear. The power and mystery of that boundary, where the oceans come to an end and the land begins, should not be underestimated. 8,000 times a day, the battle of boundaries rages across an invisible line drawn in the sand, leaving nearly 4% of the Earth's surface covered in the foam of retreating waves. Each moment that a new wave curls around your feet, an area equal to the entire continent of North America, is hidden beneath bursting and fading foam in an ongoing battle for boundaries. Once chaos has been brought under God's rule, the elements of creation are redirected to participate in God's creative purposes. On the first day, light and darkness were given boundaries. Chaos ended. While on the 4th day, the static boundaries are set in motion. They are given specific tasks and called to actively participate in the work of the Creator. Likewise, the motionless boundaries between the heavens and the seas established on the 2nd day are now swarming with living creatures, which fly across the face of the heavens and plunge through the depths of the waters on day 5. The new inhabitants of the heavens and the seas are then given specific tasks. Be fertile and increase. Fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. Finally, the 6th day witnesses the creation of the animals that filled the spaces created by the restriction of the seas. Humanity is included in this final day and given authority and responsibility to fill and master the earth. What God stops on the first 3 days, He puts in motion in the second 3 sets of days. Both of these actions are considered good. A great example of this that comes from my life is when our children were young and would get out of hand. We would put them in timeout. We wanted to stop the chaos. And then, when they had calmed down, we would say, "Okay, now go clean your room." In the same way, God stops chaos and then gets creation moving to do what He has called it to do. Now, also notice that at the end of the 6th day, we get a further analysis of God's creative work. Beginning in verse 31, "And God saw that all that He had made and found it very good." Why does God make this distinction after the 6th day? Some suggest that the appearance of humanity upon the creative stage as the final capstone to the creative order. However, on the whole, the actions of humanity upon the earth have been far from good for creation, much less very good. So, why is the entirety of creation very good? What makes the completed order greater than the sum of its parts? Well, I think perhaps that once complete, creation can itself create. Now, the creation can continue the work of invention and innovation that the Creator has set in motion. Perhaps our collective goodness is found in our ability to continue the work and image of God. Work that is good, good enough to be shared with the next generation. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.